Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us at TAP Series, the second edition of this Talks on Architecture and Beyond with the theme, The Making of Architecture. So welcome to this educational and learning journey together with inspired professionals from the architecture and design industry across the Southeast Asia. I can believe that it's almost the end of March already, and we are with our third talk, which also marks the closing of the first quarter theme, concept and inception. This concept represents the first momentos of the architecture, where we learn from our invite speakers the design solutions that respond to the challenges in the different built environments, how to conceptualize ideas and find inspirations to start a project. Moreover, in this last month of every quarter, TAP Series will invite an architect or designer from a different country of Southeast Asia to go in depth and share practices and experiences from different perspectives that is rooted in different cultures, which enrich even more the architecture. And today, I am glad to share with all of you that Philippines is our guest country of TAP Series. So this session is also being broadcast in our partner showroom in Manila, Philippines. And I want to thank Aston Technology, Jennifer and Oliver, for allowing us to organize this talk in their showroom. So to all architects and designers in Manila, please pay a visit to the fantastic showroom that Aston has at Wilson Street. So don't miss today this inspiring talk on building an environment.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks a lot, Maria. It's always a pleasure to see you every month for our TAP series. Welcome again, everyone, for this talk. It is the third one of 2021, the end of the first quarter. And as Maria mentioned, so it is usually like for every quarter we will be inviting one of a guest country from our region. And today is Philippines. And we are very excited to welcome our speaker from the Philippines. But before that, just to remind a little bit on what is the theme of this year for the TAP series, the making of architecture. Why are we focusing on the making of architecture? We all have experienced a very difficult time with COVID-19. It is still happening all over the world. And this has also raised a certain awareness on the way that we do architecture, and perhaps that we need to slow down a little bit towards the making of it, and to remind us that architecture takes time. And that's why we are dissecting these different steps. And so for the first quarter of 2021, we are focusing on the concept and the first ideas, the inception of a project. And so for that, I'm really honored to have on board today for our talk. So William from WTA Arquitectura Design Studio. So for the one who don't know him, I don't know how to present him because he's been doing so many things. He's a young architect, just turned about to turn 41 years old, so considered very young because I am 41 years old. So William T. Jr., he's the principal architect and founder of WT Architecture and Design Studio. He's also the founder and director of Entology Festival, which is an amazing architecture festival, pretty famous as well. Shelter Magazine, that's also he's heading this magazine, and the Bookstop Project, and he writes the City of Tomorrow column for the Philippines Daily Inquirer. So William is a strong advocate of social architecture that promotes an architecture that builds communities. So today he will be sharing with us this social architecture that seeks to incorporate social functions and infrastructure as a major component of the design process. So they are pushing for like hyper-local barrier-free spaces that help to bring everyone together. It is once again an architecture that builds the communities. So with much further ado, I will welcome William on stage. well, we don't have a physical stage when he's in the showroom there, but let's welcome William. Thanks a lot, William. The floor is yours.
Yeah, so thanks to Cosentino for inviting, and to Jan, of course, for inviting me to this series and to share our ideas with everyone. Today, I'd like to share with you our ideas and our agenda as an architect. So, WTA Architecture and Design Studio, our primary agenda is to push for social architecture. So, just to give you a bit of context of why we came up with this and who we are, I'd like to share with you the city where we work in. So we work in the city of Manila. Now, this is the core of our city where it started. Intramuros, which means inside the walls in Spanish, is the old Spanish city from which Manila grew. Right now, Intramuros has about 6,000 people. But that does not give you a good picture of what Manila really is. So Manila has grown quite a bit through the years. And if you look at these photos, it shows from Intramuros to the city of Manila, to Metro Manila, and then of course to the greater outskirts of the greater Metro Manila. So the city of Manila, if you look around, has a population of 1.78 million people. But that's actually just 6% of our urban area. If you look at the greater Metro Manila area, you're looking at about anywhere from 25 to 32 million people. So it's one of the biggest megacities in the world. In fact, maybe next to Mumbai, that would be the second densest megacity in the world. And it's always around the top 4, top 5 biggest cities. So Metro Manila is a very dense city. So we feel like there is really no way for us to kind of like follow. There's no blueprint in terms of like how we are going to be developing our cities. Our cities, we are maybe the 21st century, if anything, maybe this decade is an age of mega cities, right? We are always talking about urban agglomerations, about cities, coming together into these regions of development. And same goes with the Philippines. Mega Manila is a very big private city. About 60 to 70% of our economy is based here in Mega Manila. So oftentimes when you're faced with a city of this size, you always feel like you're a tiny architect in a big city, right? So we are often faced with the question of what role can an architect play? How do we make change possible? Because architects are always very concerned about change. So this was one of the early projects that started to get us thinking about our city in general and what sort of impact we can have in our city. So this was an exhibit that we did for the Venice Biennale. And in this, we were exploring the idea that Manila is a very fragmented city. Throughout the history of our city, lots keep subdividing. And so you have smaller and smaller lots. And so in Manila, you don't see, these large developments that you would usually see in Asia with 20 buildings or 15 buildings or so, but rather individual buildings. So these individual buildings, they tend to have a much bigger influence in their surroundings. And so we were exploring how, buildings or architecture done right can have, a much broader impact, because basically what you're doing is like breeds like. And successful buildings, of course, they garner much more copying and patronage. And so we thought to ourselves, to make change possible, you just have to think architecture. It should be an architecture of ideas. It's not about spaces. It's not about form. Try to detach ourselves from the hubris of being, form making and sculpting and all these things, but rather come up with a system for us to be able to make ideas possible and find ideas that can create change. But the first question then that we have to ask is, what is an architect? And I think, for me, the best way for me to kind of like show is just to show who I am as an architect. So this is the area I grew up in. The one end of this line is my home and the other end is my school. So this is where I would walk through every day. Now, this is in the district of Tondo. And the district of Tondo is the densest district in the densest city in the world. So what this means is that, I grew up in this situation where you're always faced with people. You're always rubbing shoulders. Basically, every 13 square meters, you have one person, right? And if you look at, the built-up spaces in Tondo, it's not very vertical. It's a very horizontal, very dense space. And so, this is the top area is my home. The next one is our small office. And then the last one is my school. So basically, every day, I was just walking through these three places. And this is actually the old house. I got this image from Google Earth. So, I mean, the house is, quite obscured now because of the tree and, it hasn't been repaired in a long time. But what's important here is that you see the streetscape, right? I mean, the idea of public space in our country basically means you are very concerned about the space immediately in front of your house. There is a sense of ownership towards these spaces, almost in a way that you can occupy them and do whatever you want. And in fact, if you go through Tondo, if you look at the different places there, you will see computer shops on the sidewalk, video arcades. You will see houses for roosters. You will see pets. You will see salons. You will see nail spas. Everything in terms of like how the economy is working. It's really on the street, right? It's really that small space in front of your own home. Another thing that contributed to my experience as an architect is being able to play street ball, and this allowed me to kind of like be in touch with so many different people. The great equalizer, is sports, right? And so when we're playing sports, you play with your neighbors, you play with people who are actually coming from a different neighborhood just to play ball with you. And this street culture, I think, is something that greatly contributes to the way I see architecture. My architecture and my idea of what an architect is really revolves around people. It revolves around your corner store, that space where you go to instead of going to a supermarket. And I've always been enamored with this kind of like street life. And I think another great influence is comic books. I've been collecting comic books since I was like 8 or 9 years old. And, it's always been Spider-Man that has drawn me into this kind of like world, where anything is possible. And I think that's what kind of like got me towards my first step into being an architect, as I think a lot of architects are around the world. It's really the comic books, right, that draw us in. And also, I've always been an avid reader of fantasy books because I believe that fantasy books allow you to kind of like imagine infinite possibilities, right? There are like so many different worlds out there, so many different things and ways in which our world can actually work. And so I think this opens up your mind, especially for someone who grew in a very small neighborhood. And lastly, I think one of my great influences is this idea of play. So I've always enjoyed being able to play with toys and everything. And I feel like, playing is really, that experimentation that each of us must kind of like embrace as architects. And so a lot of our work is about experimentation and trying new things out and not just assuming that things are the way they are and will always be so. So our studio is pretty young. We probably have around 100 people or so. But really our focus is in terms of like, how do we make architecture fun? And that's really, how we feel every day, that architecture must be celebrated. It must be something that's fun and positive, something that people actually want to engage in. And we always have this kind of like image of like how we can look back at like this clocksmiths, the tinker workshops, and then of course what a science lab is or a physics lab. And we always feel like our studio itself is an urban lab. And we always say that we try to design something, but we always have to keep refining until we are able to define something new or something different for this typology or that. So I think our journey into social architecture starts with this project called the Bookstop Project. And it was really very apt because of my love for books and, it was just the right story. And I've always felt like, I love the idea of books. I love the feel of a book in my hands. I love the anticipation as you turn a page, the smell of paper. And yet, when we're tasked to design libraries, we're always asked, how can we make libraries relevant? Do people still like to read? And so I figured, as someone who still loves physical books and still wants to make them relevant, I felt like architecture maybe is what needs to change. Maybe it's the platform in terms of how we deliver our books that needs to be developed and rethought. So when you go to a typical library, I think this is a photo I took of the Rose Reading Room in New York, and it's one of the most beautiful reading rooms in the world. And yet, when you go here, it feels like you're in awe, right? And almost all libraries, even the new ones, they try to overwhelm you, with a sheer number of books, with this incredible cavernous spaces, and it almost feels like a place where you cannot just goof around, where you cannot hang around with your friends. It almost isn't a fun place. And so we felt like that needs to change. And so I was like sitting around Intramuros, and this is the Manila Cathedral. So the Philippines has a lot of piazzas, right? And so this is one of the plazas. It's called Plaza Roma. And oftentimes, like I was mentioning, the idea of public space in our country extends to the front of our own homes. But these actual public spaces and open spaces where people can actually come and congregate are not being utilized very well. So we thought to ourselves, what if we inserted a library in the park? And so we built here the bookstop. And so this idea of like putting a library in the park where people can actually just come in, grab a book, and just read under a tree or on a bench or somewhere inside this piazza or park is something that we wanted to promote and celebrate. We wanted to promote this idea of libraries as center, of micro communities. We want to make libraries local. We don't want people to have to journey, somewhere, travel, take a ride, drive. We want the library to be next door. And so we thought about inserting these libraries into different places. So how do these libraries work? It works by making them into learning centers, right? We always talk about how knowledge is important in terms of nation building. And so I think awareness about issues, about everything, is something, it's a passive way of learning that everyone should have access to. And so we invite speakers, we invite authors, we invite artists to give workshops. We do mental health sessions, we do lectures and seminars. And in a way, it becomes, part of their daily lives. So the Bookstop project actually becomes a place for everyone. And you can actually almost feel like it's somewhere where people congregate. For example, this photo is actually a very casual photo. Someone was doing a free talk, a free speech. It was an open mic session, basically a storytelling session. And since this was in the middle of a CBD, people who were on their way home from work just stopped by to watch and listen. And so libraries almost become this beacon or campfire where everyone can gather. And so what we did was we moved these libraries from one location to the other, gathering data, checking out how much people actually want libraries in their communities. And in most of these spaces, there actually is an existing library. What we found is that our libraries, or these type of open libraries, are about, I think, 2,000% more efficient. We were turning over about 100, 150 books a day as compared to maybe 10 or 15. And I think it was this idea that everyone's welcome, that there are no barriers, and there's no librarian telling you what to do. It's basically making a library into a completely public space. And one of the unexpected offshoots of these spaces was how kids kind of embraced and accepted these libraries. And spaces that are open to all are spaces that are most welcoming to small kids who are always being told, no, you can't do this, no, you can't do that, don't touch this. And so we feel like in a way, architecture must not discriminate against everyone, especially libraries, because kids are the people who need to learn the most, right? So when we first put up the bookstop project, all these like street kids in the area, they started to congregate around the library. And it felt so sad because the guards at first were shooing them away. And so we thought to ourselves, architecture should not exclude. So we started to, talk to these kids, started to welcome them in. In fact, I remember one of the kids asking me and saying, so can I bring this book home? And I said, yes, you can bring. And then he was asking me, how many books can I bring? And I said, bring home as many as you want. And after a while, they started to figure out, okay, these books are public property. We actually taught them what a public space and public property means. And so they started to help us take care of the library. They started helping us arrange the books in the shelves. In fact, one of the kids actually taught me a better way of arranging the books. And even people who just passed by, students who passed by, they started reading to these kids. It really felt very gratuitous to be able to kind of like teach, and show people, small steps really in terms of like, if not learning from the books, then learning what being in a public space means, learning what being part of society really means. And so, kids can come in groups, they can be alone, they can find space in the park, in the piazza, they can sit down there, but there will always be something for them to do, and they don't have to be running around the streets. And this is maybe the nicest and saddest part about building these libraries, is that we have come to realize that a lot of our street kids, it's not that they want to be running around the streets, but there's just no place for them to go. I mean, a lot of them are not actually that poor. They're just neglected. There's nowhere for them to run to, and they need a place to call their own. And so I felt like every moment you can take away a kid from the street is a win for architecture and society in general. And so now we're working with one of the biggest mall developers in our country, and we're working on the Book Nook. And our hope is that by building this library inside the shopping mall, if it can work, then if shopping malls really are the communal centers of a lot of Asian cities and communities, then we should have a library in each and every one of them. If we can have a cinema or a movie house or a theater, in every shopping mall, why can't we have a library? And so far it's been a great experience, and we hope to be able to make this change happen throughout our shopping centers. So looking at the Bookstop project, there were certain things, that kind of like taught us and started us on this way towards developing these ideas about social architecture. One of these ideas is about social intimacy. It's about making spaces hyper-local and convenient. This has always been my favorite photo of the Bookstop project. This was the day after the last presidential elections. And I've built cities, I've designed towers, and yet I think this is the only time you can have maybe the front page leading photo of the largest newspaper or the oldest newspaper in your country. And it's with a very small and simple idea. The idea that we want a seamless transfer of power, although this one's about the president. We want to transfer power from our monolithic, hidebound, old institutions to everyone, to everyone in our communities, to each and everyone. We want to make these spaces available. We want to make knowledge, which is power, available to everyone. So the great change, that we wanted was we wanted to create this change that we have seen when we shifted from our desktop computers or our laptops towards our mobile phones. Having information readily available to you anywhere you are, making it more intimate, making it more accessible, making it more convenient. We want to make our institutions hyper-local. And why did we think about this? In the Philippines, there are basically two places that you will find everywhere. One is the barangay hall. The whole country is divided into about 42,000 barangays. And, anytime you have a problem, that's the first place you run to. You have trouble with your neighbor, you're quarreling with your wife, and there's any kind of like disturbance, you go to these barangay halls. And, even in this pandemic, we've seen how hyper-local access to government is actually how we distribute a lot of the information, a lot of the services that people will need. We need to strengthen our community bubbles. We need to make spaces hyper-local. And I think that's increasingly important in bigger and bigger megacities. We have to make our cities local. And then another space, that you will see in everywhere actually in our country are churches or chapels, right? There's about 3,000 major parishes in our country, but more so, we have so many chapels. You can find a chapel inside most shopping malls. You can find a chapel in most random corners. You can find inside hospitals, inside funeral parlors, everywhere. We are people who pray and believe, and I guess that's why whenever you want to maybe pass your exams or you want to win the lottery, you pray, right? You want to find a girlfriend, you pray. That's really what we do. We're people who believe, who have faith. And what this means is that the two biggest institutions in our country, the church and the state, have realized that for them to reach out to 100 million Filipinos, they must be everywhere. So we started to think, if these institutions have figured out that this is the way to move forward, how can we apply them to our learning spaces? So aside from the Bookstop project, this was a project we did with the Spanish embassy. They were showing some images from the Museo del Prado. And so they came up to us and said they wanted to tour them in the Philippines. And we thought to ourselves, instead of just doing a simple exhibition, maybe we can build a museum in the park. We can build a museum for everyday life. In a way, this is so much better than going to an actual museum. How many of us have experienced going to an art museum and where we have this list of important art pieces that we have to see, and you're almost running around? It's almost like you're in an amazing race and you just need to do a checklist, right? And yet, isn't it better to be able to enjoy art in your everyday life? So what happens is that the art is there, it's in the park, it's in the plaza, on your way to work, on your way home, you pass by, maybe you enjoy one or two pieces, and that makes your day, much more relevant, and maybe energizes you in so many creative ways. And then, by building these modules, we're able to arrange them into galleries, into corridors, into centerpieces. It's really about creating that space with these modules, and yet placing them in the middle of our public spaces. We are making our museums public, and we are bringing them to the people. We're bringing art, to our everyday lives, especially to people who have, never even been to a museum. So a lot of these people, the security guards, the service workers, the street kids, they've never even seen a museum. And so by bringing, such important art closer to them, to their daily lives, I think it makes a big change. The other idea, and I think this is why opening up our spaces are important, is this idea about freedom of movement. Architects, we always like to talk about accessibility, and yes, there are so many issues about accessibility, but I think especially here in our country, we're forgetting that a lot of our spaces are not accessible, to a big percentage of our population. Architecture should not discriminate. Oftentimes, when you're going somewhere, there's like maybe 5 or 6 steps too many before you can actually get to the space you want to. For example, this is a public park. This is one of the oldest, used to be one of the most beautiful parks in our city. It's called the Mehan Gardens. And yet it's walled off. There's security in the gates. And, this like abundance or preponderance of security everywhere that you see creates barriers between each and every one of us. It divides us in so many ways, right? And stops us from going to the places that we actually need to go to. And, oftentimes when you go to a museum or library, you have to go through a gate, you have to go through security, you enter a door, you have to register, you have to get information. So this actually discriminates against people who maybe are not, dressed properly, who do not have shoes. This discriminates against people who are too busy at work, who cannot take the time out to travel maybe an hour or so just to go to the museum or a library. We need to make everything open and accessible. We need to make it seamless. We need to create seamless connections in our communities. And so when we were tasked to design this stadium, the Philippines is really, we're a basketball crazy country. We do not really play a lot of football or baseball, and yet we keep building stadiums, and these stadiums are maybe used once or twice a year for regional or provincial festivals, for local festivals and holidays, and maybe for elections and stuff like that. So we started to think to ourselves when we were looking at this site that our stadium was actually south of a university and west of a public park. So we thought to ourselves, a football pitch is not just a football pitch, and this was abundant. This was very clear to us when we were building this shopping mall in Batangas, and we were thinking to ourselves, this football pitch is actually one of the nicest parks in that city. And so we thought to ourselves, what if we chop off, the eastern side of the stadium and made it completely open to the park? What if we made it into an extension of the park and we welcomed everyone in, and it becomes part of people's everyday life? So this is what we decided to build. We decided to open up one side of the stadium, make it into an extension of the park, and then that street that bisects the stadium from the university, we turned into a promenade. And if you look at the entirety of the side of this stadium, all those arches are completely open. So you're creating this arcaded walk, especially for a tropical climate, where students can actually hang out. And you're opening up the entire stadium to everyone in the area. Now, this is no longer a stadium. It becomes a stadium park. It becomes a public space because this building or this structure is being funded by public money. And, really, it becomes not about the sports. It becomes about that space, especially now, during this crisis or during this pandemic, where we need so much open space to be available to our cities and our people. We need spaces, where we can walk around in. And so this is the space that actually connects the stadium to the school. And immediately, the students acquire a space for them to train in, for their life, for their activities, for their sports and games. And I think that's how you build a stadium, maybe in our country, where you don't play football, is that you turn them into a park. Now, another idea that we had about social architecture was this idea about social scale. Architects, we always talk about human scale, but we felt like we have to talk about, another element. When we're building, especially in a very tight city, in a very dense city, in a very crowded built environment, what we actually need is every structure to be connecting each and every one of us. We need to lubricate our daily lives, And so, the sad part is that the entire city of Metro Manila is bisected by the Pasig River. You can see the major business districts. It's not one side or the other, it's on both sides of the river. And yet, there is not a single pedestrian bridge that crosses our river. So what this means is that for you to cross to the other side, you have to drive a car, you have to take public transport, which is very difficult in our country. And you're basically spending half an hour to an hour just to cross this river. So we felt like it's very important for us to reintroduce this idea of pedestrian bridges. And so right now we're building the first pedestrian bridge in Metro Manila, and we're calling it the River Lane. And then the question becomes, what is a bridge, right? And people always think of bridges as crossing points because they're in a car, they cross the bridge, they go to the other side. Yes, bridges connect. But bridges are also hubs, they're centers, they're centers for us to connect in. They're connecting two sides of the river. It is somewhere where people meet and gather. And so we said to ourselves, we need to reintroduce, pedestrian bridges to our city and to our people. We cannot just build a simple bridge. We need to insert program into the bridge. We need to make it some place where people hang out to remind them, of why Manila is actually built around our river. We want to remind people that, there's a very intimate, relationship between Manileños and our river, which is the Pasig River. And so we wanted to come up with not just the architecture, but we actually came up with a program in terms of we built a year or a calendar year of events. And what we're going to be doing is we'll be building something like what we did with the library, where we actually inserting regular programming to the bridge, and people meet in the bridge. They come here to celebrate the river, and also then learn what it means to be able to cross the river on foot. Now, I started this talk by saying we always question, what an architect's role is in society. Recently, with this pandemic, it was very evident for us, really. Today actually marks, 1 year anniversary when we first started this program for emergency quarantine facilities. And, even now, I keep trying to imagine what else can we do, what's the next step for us, and what more can we do for, our society. But I think, this project shows very clearly how important architects are to society. When we were first faced with this lockdown, and everyone of us was kind of like, tied down, didn't know what to do, we started to ask ourselves, what's needed most, right? What can we do? And we started to kind of like think about this idea about hyperlocal spaces, about social architecture, and we thought to ourselves, people are afraid. People in fear do not want to be sent to a far off place or quarantine area where you gather thousands of people or hundreds of people, and they don't know anything of that place, especially people who are uninformed. And so we thought the easiest way or the best way for us to help was to be able to augment our hospitals. We should be able to augment the capacity of our hospitals to allow them to accept more patients immediately. And that is where emergency really comes in, right? That really is the meaning of what an emergency architect is, and it shows how important architects are to our society. It shows the role that we can play as builders. I think we have often forgotten what it means to be an architect. We draw, we design, but the most important thing is we build for our society and our communities. And so the program that we came up with started with this pavilion that we actually built, where we were trying to reimagine as architecture moves forward, as more and more things gets automated. Maybe we have to detach ourselves from all the documentation. Sometimes we're building buildings with 1,000 pages of blueprints. And so we thought to ourselves, is that really architecture? I mean, we wanted to be able to build with just very simple line drawings. And we wanted to be able to pull that off. So we started with this pavilion. And so we had this know-how, we had this methodology, and we were able to figure out that with 20 workers and one architect, in 5 days, we can actually build one of these facilities. And so at first, we just wanted to build 4 prototypes, but then of course the demand kind of like overtook us. And so we started, to share our ideas. We made the plans open source, and yet we still kept getting calls from our local hospitals, from local government units, and we started to build these facilities. And that is where I saw, this role that architects play in our society, where we can bring everyone together, where we can actually, bring in a doctor, bring in doctors, soldiers, engineers, builders, vendors. These are all the faces and all the people that are, working, at the height, of panic or fear when the pandemic first hit us last March. And so these were people who were volunteering to be on the front lines. These were architects and builders who were there. We made builders into emergency workers, and we made them essential parts of our community. Healthcare is very important, but any community needs shelter. And I think that's the role that we wanted to embrace as architects. So this is a video showing how we built these structures. This is a site where we actually built 120 beds. There were 4 different facilities here in this site. And you can really see how each team was actually building their own facility differently, because we had to use 4 teams to build, these 4 facilities. And, the methodology that you're actually learning from the workers themselves, I think that's what it means to be building for your community. Architects are always situated in places of like commanding or demanding how things can or should be built. And yet oftentimes it's the craftsmen, the people on the ground who actually know how to build things better, how to build things faster, how to make things work. And so this was our experience really, that we should embrace everyone, in our building industry, from the vendors to the workers, to the individuals on site. And so by doing it this way, we can actually figure out how we can build something um, that actually works. And so what we did was we used, the most primitive or the simplest materials. We use wood and plastic. Anywhere you go to our 7,000 islands, you will be able to find wood and plastic. It's everywhere. These materials are very forgiving. They're very flexible. Anyone with a hammer and a nail can work with them, or a staple gun. And so these were the materials we embraced, because in times of crisis, you need something that is immediately available. And so with our rural areas everywhere in our archipelago, you don't need special equipment, you don't need special tools. What you just need is you just need the plans, which are like probably like 5 to 10 pages. Very simple plans that kept iterating. We had the help of so many architects, so many doctors who kept improving the plans, trying to adjust them. And I think it was very important that we actually have architects on site, because, of course, the different areas had different spaces available. We were usually building in quadrangles, in backyards, in parking spaces. And so we had to adjust, right? We had to find how to make the facilities work, the amenities, the toilets, the plumbing, the electricity. And so being able to build L-shaped facilities, T-shaped ones, Y-shaped ones, I think this was very important. And having architects who are actually hands-on, who are actually building things on site, I think really matters, because then you're able to make changes immediately. And so in the end, I think we built over 3,000 beds, and that's just us. And we also had friends from other islands, other regions building with our plans. We made all the plans open source and available online. And it kind of like became this national effort that was done by architects to fight the pandemic. Now, I think if I have a bit of time, I'll just skip this project, which we are doing. But anyway, suffice to say, is what we've done here is we've been able to change our community, so to prevent dead streets from happening. So this is the house where I'm living in right now, actually. And in our area, there's been a lot of walled off spaces where you have these townhouses. And so, in by embracing security, you're actually creating dead streets. And as an architect and an urbanist, I told myself, how do we stop this? How do we how do we put a halt to this? And so I said, the way we can change this is by making something that is better. And so what we've done is we've suggested, what if we could just stack these different houses or homes one on top of the other, and build this typical apartment structure, but very low density, with maybe 12 families only, and still open up the ground plane, create lively streets. And it harkens back, like I said, to where I grew up in, where the streets are always alive. And so after building this first building, now we're doing two more in the same area. And the hope, and this is like, for me, proof that architecture can make change happen. So if you are an architect or a tiny architect, if you build in a small neighborhood, you can actually make big change. Now, the last project I'm introducing to you is this project we call Manileño. Manileño is the demonym for Filipinos who live in Manila, in our city. And when we were tasked to build this project, we kind of like thought to ourselves, how do we want to master plan a new city? And basically for us, it was not about planning a city, but about figuring out how to build communities. So this project is located just off the city of Manila in the Bay, and it's about 419 hectares. Now, if you look at this map of the Manila's growth rate, horizon is there, the last photo to the right, the blue area there. So Manila's been growing, through the suburbs, expanding. There's just this huge sprawl coming out because of the limited space available to us. So I felt like if there's this opportunity to be able to build in the middle of our city, in terms of like just beside the core or Intramuros, in the city of Manila, urbanity, then I think it would be a great opportunity to alleviate, the traveling. Most people travel to and from Manila 2 to 4 hours a day just to get to work. So the more people you can accommodate in our city, the less they have to travel from the outskirts coming in. And so it was a very simple idea. We said, Manila is a city built around the river Pasig. And so we want to replicate that. We want to build settlements, along this canal park. And so we wanted to create this interesting landform instead of just reclaimed flat islands. And so we said, if we have this canal park and have the different buildings form almost like an urban valley around this park, right? And just have 28, different settlements around here. We're not dictating where, for example, commercial spaces are, offices should be, or residents should be. Most of them are primarily mixed use, but we're designating diversity in terms of like programming. And so what we try to do is we're creating a diverse sort of like movement and hierarchy in terms of how people congregate and how you accommodate people, because this enforces diversity of communities, right? So, because the question really was, how do we build a community? What is a community? Community are made of people with shared experiences, right? We grow up in a place together, we share the same experiences. So you have to have a point of interest or centrality. You build in a piazza, you build in a basketball court, you build in a library, a museum, and then the community that grows around this place becomes a stronger, a more bonded, community, right? And another thing that makes communities is, you have to have this passive, segregation. The way you determine what is us, what belongs to this community, is by being to identify what the other community is. And so by having this like passive boundaries and divisions, by building this 28, different communities, what we're now doing is we're just allowing, these communities to grow out of different catalysts or seeds that we plant along the side of this canal park. And the canal park allows us, of course, to accommodate and address the water shortage issues of our city. We haven't been able to build a new dam in decades. And I think regularly we are faced with shortages in water. And so this development will actually be able to contribute back to the city of Manila. And the whole city is built to be walkable. I mean, the idea was we can do without cars in the city. So anywhere you are in this city, you'll be 5 minutes away from a tram station, which means you're about 10 minutes away or 15 minutes away from anywhere in the rest of the island. And of course, the primary goal is to make everything pedestrian. So there's actually two main pedestrian routes, one along the river or the canal, and then another like secondary pedestrian path that connects all three islands. And so, the reality is like these points of interest, they encourage movement, right? So you're moving from one community to the other, from one place to the other. And this harkens back to our idea of what growing up in the city of Manila means. The great thing about Manila is it's a very small, dense city where you can walk 5 minutes and you're in a different community. You're traveling from a market community to an electronics community to a school or university belt. There are all these different communities, a religious piazza maybe. So we want to recreate that experience where you can actually be walking through the city. And, we wanted, of course, to place in the middle the transportation hub and the municipal center. So maybe I'd like to end with this video that we did about Horizon Manila and share this with you. Sorry? Thank you. Sorry. Oh. Okay. Then yeah. I think it was turned off earlier. Sorry.
Manila is the most beautiful and most vibrant city in our country. Every neighborhood has its own identity, its own history, its own community and character.
Horizon Manila embodies the passions and the dreams of every Manileño for a better Manila. It reimagines a new city for a new era.
Horizon Manila is an amazing place specifically planned for every Manileño. By integrating the future of Manila with the spirit of its existing neighborhoods, we have this incredible opportunity not just to build a new city, but to revive and transform the city of Manila.
It's about building a city with a remarkable abundance of public space and nature. This will be one of the most important investments in the future of our country.
We design a city for people, not for cars.
The three islands are bisected by a canal part that acts as the center for life in Horizon and connects all three islands. It recalls our roots as Tagalog people who settled along the banks of the Pasig River and acts as a green valley in the middle of the bustling city. This 4-kilometer-long canal, along with the two main dividing waterways and various reservoirs, will allow the city to be self-sufficient with fresh water and even allow it to help with the water scarcity problems of the city.
Any master plan for Manila has to start with its people and communities. We are not designing a top-down regimented master plan with homogeneous landmarks and streetscapes. We are creating an organic collection of 28 diverse and compact mixed-use communities that reflect the identity and character of Manila. We believe that communities are built by providing its people with a shared experience in the form of common geography and public space. This allows them to come together and form stronger bonds with the support of social infrastructure like streetscapes and plazas.
We've reimagined libraries, museums, bridges, and even medical facilities for Manila with a network of hyper-local, barrier-free spaces for our communities. At Horizon Manila, we're once more pursuing ideas to help build better communities for Manileños. We've imagined a collection of progressive, diverse, and compact communities that act like settlements strung along a winding canal part. Each community has its own narrative and story with unique localities and features that allow them to thrive and grow into extraordinarily livable and human communities. For us, this is the first step to building neighborhoods that can be as distinctive as the ones we grew up in.
We need so much more open space and public buildings for our Manileños. Our plan will feature over 419 hectares of both green spaces and community amenities. These green and community ratios will form the backbone of our developmental guidelines for the city.
The very interesting part in Horizon Manila is not just the community itself, but the idea of having a better transportation hub for everyone.
Horizon Manila will feature a comprehensive personal mobility system with extensive 3-line sidewalks and bicycle lane networks that ensures that everywhere in the city is within a 5-minute walk from the mass transit system.
Our cities must reflect the spirit of our times. What we can achieve for the generations to come is marked by the courage to take the next step, to move forward with the knowledge and understanding of society, culture, and technology. The city of tomorrow is defined not by the buildings that we build, nor by the systems and technologies that will continue to evolve. It is one where human society can reap the fruits of labor and technology to live an enjoyable and progressive, sustainable lifestyle. It is a city that serves to uplift the individual diversity and human qualities of people and create stronger and more connected communities for a better Manila.
Horizon Manila will be the cosmopolitan city of tomorrow, on the forefront of creativity and innovation, geared to serve and strengthen the vitality of our people. And so, I invite all of you to Horizon Manila and experience the city of Manila as a place where together we can build a better future.
So I guess with that being said, I'd like to conclude with this idea. Architects these days are faced with this question of, what role to play, in our society. And oftentimes we are told that architects, must embrace humility and must maybe build smaller. And yet, I would like to challenge that and say that architects, are a great generator of change. If we want to make our built environment better, if we can care about our built environment as much as our natural environment, we must, embrace, this role that architects play in our society. We must embrace our role as builders, as thinkers. And maybe, I'd like to conclude with this line from Daniel Burnham that says, make no small plans. They have no power to capture the hearts and minds of people. And I really hope you do. Thank you.
Thank you so much, William. It's I'm speechless here. I don't know where to start. Wow. That was amazing. That was extremely interesting, and I could continue on like this in listening to what you are talking about. So what a stellar trajectory from your practice, the diversity of the project you are handling together with your team. And yeah, the level of innovation that is much needed for the future of our cities and the future of our communities. So thanks a lot for all of this. I'm reading my notes because I have like many questions and well, the first question that I have, and I keep receiving some other questions on my phone. So I try to focus a little bit on what I would like to ask you. But what is, because you've been talking a lot about your practice, the different kind of project that you do, the desire that you have, the contribution for the society, the communities. But can we know a little bit the behind the scene? In like, how do you work, and how do you start basically all of your creative process? You talk about hyper local, hyper context, but how do you start your ideas?
Yeah, so I think the way we like to work, I actually missed the video on sketches because
I could see.
Actually, we look at the last project Horizon, which is a 419 hectare city, right? It also started with a simple sketch, and I actually had that on video. The first sketches, right? We like to work with pen and paper, of course, as every architect does, and we like to tinker with models, as I said. But I think the process really for us starts with breaking down, different projects or typologies. We try to have no presumptions, about buildings. For example, if you build a shopping mall, is it, are you given a brief and just build that, we try to think in terms of first principles and try to break it down to its core spaces. For example, like, is a shopping mall a market, a piazza, a forum, just a public space, right? And then try to bring in together the different programs and see maybe we can put them together in a different way and insert certain interventions that then allows you to build something new. We also like to kind of like tinker, with how people react actually. Like, I think that's just me being obstinate. But like, for example, when we built the library, people were saying, in 3 days, you're going to lose all the books because you don't have anyone guarding them. But, I think that taught us a very valuable lesson. Like, we started with 300 books and now we have more books than we can deal with. Because so I think we always like to prove people wrong in terms of like a lot of the things that we do maybe, and and that's really how we work. We try to challenge preconceived notions, and even the master plan. Instead of doing a master plan, what we're saying is maybe we plan each small community, and then they grow together, and they become a tapestry, if you may.
Yes, I think what is important in your practice and your project, it is a sense of ownership. And why it works is because basically you include the communities and you make them more responsible, more autonomous. So there is clearly this sense of ownership and most of the time in Southeast Asia we are always fighting about this sense of ownership. How do we live in the street? How do we live together? Which is the theme of this year Biennale in Venice, but. So how do you define that in your work? How do you make sure that basically this sense of ownership is properly transferred towards the people? And then, as you mentioned, suddenly the books are not disappearing, but more books are coming in. How can you explain that?
I think the question that architects often ask is, for whom do we build, right?
Yes.
And we're always arguing, are we building for the finance guy, or are we building for end users? But I think a more important question is, by whom? Who builds? And I think if you embrace the people who are actually who care about a certain project. For example, you embrace the doctors when you're building quarantine facilities, or you work with librarians, people who love books, book lovers, when you're building a library. I think when they're part of that building, if they're the ones who are actually building also or designing, then that makes it better and relevant. So I think that because it's so hard to answer the for whom question, that we try to change the by whom and include people who are actually important.
Yes, and you mentioned that in the facilities that you have it for the pandemic, you really put an emphasis on who is constructing. And most of the time, architects tend to forget that we are, in our offices with our computers, and we tend to forget who built whatever we are designing. And in this, how do you include the craft in your practice? Because we can see it, we can sense it. This very strong, deep understanding of the craft. But how do you integrate that? Do you work with craftsmen? Do you go on site? So how do you do this in the development of your project?
Yes, I think that was really very important for us, especially in those facilities, that the architect is on site full time. I was showing a video where we were actually there at night. We were actually there from morning till I don't know what time in the evening when we stopped working. Of course, it was an emergency. But the idea that the architect can actually, it harkens back to the day when you have master builders on site, actually, showing people and actually learning, with the builders. And I think this is very important, that you actually learn from the builders themselves, because it informs your designs. And a lot of times they actually can come up with much more efficient and better solutions. And sometimes, these craftsmen know their materials, not sometimes, oftentimes they know them so much better than us. And so I feel like, this is something that's important, that you're there actually learning with them and not just visiting, doing a checklist and,
Yes, and in this, I've been looking at the different projects that you do. Well, I know your project from before this talk, but now to listen, it's even better. There is one common element that I find in your project. It is this high level of generosity. You feel the sense of that to include everyone, to be highly inclusive. And how do you deal with this when sometimes you have some private client who tell you, no, I want a barrier, I'm concerned about safety, I'm concerned about security, and how do you turn that? And you talked about it with this barrier-free kind of development. That's, for me, I really see it as a highly generous way of practicing. So how do you convince clients to be more generous, for example?
I think the clients who come to us also know that we embrace this very
okay.
So I mean, I think it's from where I grew up in. I really was very familiar with the neighbors, not just my immediate neighbors, but also people from adjacent neighborhoods, and I feel that strengthens you as a person, having, this diverse experience, because everyone is allowed inside. And so even when we were building a shopping mall, for example, we wanted to make it into a very porous streetscape and not like a box where you enclose things in. And so I think it's not about convincing clients, but letting them know what it is you're doing.
Yeah.
Right. And then so when they're aware that you're doing something that has a very strong social aspect, when they come to you, they kind of like have an inkling of who you are already.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I think,
Yes, and yeah, go ahead.
and like for example, I think a good example now is we're actually building a house right now, and I told the client not to put the front door in.
Wow.
So, I mean, it actually, and they agreed. So, I mean, that's really, I mean, we like to explore things like that, you know. And I think, I mean, that things that bring us all together.
And that it's interesting because by being generous, by opening things, by merging in and out, like public and private and so on, of course, the question of maintenance will come in. Like, okay, how to maintain this. And so what could be an answer for that? Because some people are asking on the chat that, okay, how to maintain such spaces where things are merging between public and private. So how to do that, for example?
I think public spaces are a public trust. And the more that a community embraces a project, the more they will help out. For example, I was telling you about how the street kids were the ones cleaning the library.
Yeah.
And it's amazing really to see that. There was a kid who told, because we had too many books, right? So we were stacking books like one in front of the other, and she told me, no, make the other books lie down, and then you can see both titles. And I was like, wow, I don't even see that in bookstores where shelf space is so valuable, right? I was like, mind blown. You know, like,
yes. That's very interesting because by interacting with the end users, then it also nurture your practice and how to replicate that in other contexts. And what I see in what you do beyond generosity and so on, it is that you are addressing the basic needs of humanity. And so when you do that, how do you interpret this from a very small project like a library in a public space to this huge new town that you are doing? Like, how do you address these basic needs of humanity?
I think we often talk about our basic needs, but the most basic need for humanity is other people.
Great.
Right now, all of us, we're experiencing that currently, right? We need other people in our lives. And so, for example, now we were proposing a community street park, for those places where people actually cannot, because the Philippines is in lockdown right now. Mm-hmm. And so we wanted to strengthen hyper-local community bubbles. And so we said there must be some place for them to go to in their immediate vicinity, because people in Manila are living packed so tightly together. And so, I mean, like, at the end of the day, I think it's about that, really.
To be together and to design for the people and to be with the people. Then I have a few personal questions for you, because you started your talk on a very personal note, where you are from, what inspires you, and so on, and the idea of play. That is something that is dear to me, because we design playscapes and so on. So I'm very much into it. So how do you relax, for example, because you're doing so many stuff? Do you still have time to play?
Yes. Well, I think the interesting about me playing, especially when I was younger, it was always about building these settings, or even like it's almost like a stage set or a narrative, right? And I think it helped me like try to think of places that will always have a story behind it. That the narrative actually dictates or determines how the space is set up. It's almost like a movie set or a stage set, if you may. And so I think that really is part of play. And even now, I think every day when we come up with those scale models and things like that, it's really, it almost feels like it almost looks. I'm not sure if you know, but it's like SimCity.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's like Sims. It's like simulating. That's really what play is, right? We're simulating real life with a different like narrative placed on top of it.
And so with this, because from like your childhood and what inspired you and what you are doing today, how do you foresee basically the next step for you? Because you're already designing a city. So what's next, like is it that, are you continuing towards a larger scale project or to go back to something a bit smaller as well?
It's actually a very interesting question because I'm writing my article for this weekend for my colleague, and that's actually my title. Where do we go from here?
Yeah.
I do not think that size is what determines what's relevant. I really like I said, the smallest project, that small library, is still the most important project that we've done. So I feel like it's about what kind of social impact you can have with your projects, and so we're really looking for projects that can affect as many people as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree with you in this, because beyond the social impact, it is to have something that is meaningful. And I think we reach also an age or in the development. We are almost the same age, so where we want to do meaningful things that are impactful, that are doing good to the society, that are doing good to the planet, and that's the most beautiful. One very last question, and after I leave you continuing what you are doing, but one very last question talking about the planet. How do you incorporate green architecture, sustainability into all of your practice, and that how do you marry this with this social architecture?
So lately, I've been working on a koi pond, actually, on a fish pond.
Yeah.
And I've certainly realized, especially with us all being trapped in our own communities, in our own neighborhood, how we're actually living in a pond. And really, the idea that we're always thinking about outside our natural environment, and that's always so hard for people to think about because it seems to be invisible. All these ideas about sustainability. But I think if we start improving our immediate built environment, and if we start realizing that having healthier, much better environments are good for each and every one of us in our immediate lives, then that will translate into bigger things. And so that's actually what I'm trying to think about now. Like, how do we make immediate change that can make people realize, the importance of sustainability in terms of our future, and of course, like how important our environment is to our lives, our health and our well-being.
Yeah, but it's a very beautiful way of concluding your talk. And when I see this, you are a highly responsive kind of architect. You react very rapidly to what is ahead of you. We could see that with your response to the pandemic, understanding the rapid development of the society as well. And as you mentioned, how do we make immediate change? So it was a very, very inspiring talk. Like many things to learn from you, your practice. I'm really happy to see the Philippines. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you physically, but hopefully we will be able to travel again soon, and I will be able to come and see you in Manila. So thanks again, William. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. Really continue making us dreaming, contributing to the Philippines and hopefully to the rest of our region. So thanks again, William. And I will be handing over to Maria now. Thanks again, William. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jan, for your questions, for moderating the talk. And well, thank you, Architect William. Really admirable, everything you do. For your, I would say, purposeful and touching presentation, and for practicing this inclusive architecture. I think your practice is a clear example of how to democratize architecture, to do it accessible to everyone, because at the end of the day, architecture improves people's lives in all sense. So we really appreciate your time and effort to contribute to the TAP series. Thank you, Jan, and to our audience. We see you next month with a new quarter theme, so stay tuned. Bye.
Bye. Thanks a lot. Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.